Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Gold, Goats, and Guns Hour here on YouTube and Periscope. My name is Tom Luongo. It is Monday, July 2nd, 2018. We got a lot to talk about tonight. I'm going to try and stay on point for about the first half an hour. For those who watch the replays, you can follow my work over at goldgoatsandguns.com. You can subscribe to my Patreon service and support what I do over at patreon.com/goldgoatsandguns, where you can get the Gold Goats and Guns monthly investment newsletter for just good evening, troops. All right. 3 things I want to talk about tonight are all in the title of this stream. Merkel's days are numbered. Mexico's revolution. Soccer generation. Russia. So let's start with last things first, because that's the fun part. Because I don't know if you guys have been watching the World Cup or not, but I have, and it's been just an absolute joy to watch. It's interesting. I saw a thing this afternoon from a prominent, ex-British footballer who's now working for ITV, came out quite explicitly saying that this has been the best World Cup he's ever seen, and that Russia's done a tremendous job in putting it on. It's not just the quality of the competition, but the quality of the presentation and everything else. And that speaks to the amount of work that went into prepping for this tournament. Because you remember, the Russians have got a lot of flack for hosting this tournament. Remember Sepp Blatter controversy over the wording of this World Cup. I'm sure that was politically driven by the Americans behind the scene, and because there's no way that they wanted Russia to put a brave face on the World Cup and show everybody that it's not a communist shithole, for lack of a better term. So it's been a fascinating thing to watch, and I finally got a chance to finish watching the replay of the game that Russia played against Spain. Spain, far better team, dominated possession. I'm watching this game like Camille and I are watching this game like we used to watch a hockey game, because as far as I can say, I always say that soccer is kind of like slow hockey on grass, and being a huge hockey fan, at least in times past, being a hockey fan, watching the game play out, it really is just the tactics are very similar. The pace is a lot slower, but we were watching Spain yesterday after they went up last night. We watched them go up 1-0 over Russia, and then immediately kind of just back off and just sat there like, oh, we could score again, winning. And good evening, Jen Johnson. How are you? And we just watched them try not to win, or really not push themselves to win. And it was obvious. I knew the score because you guys told me yesterday while I was earlier, and I knew what was going on. But I swore I wouldn't tell Camille. So I had to couch all of my comments as, well, if Spain loses this game, it's going to be their fault, because they really didn't try to push for a 2-0 lead. And the moment the Russians scored on the penalty kick, that was it. For the next 60 minutes, Spain just looked like everybody else. It just looked like it was somebody else was going to actually try and win this game. It was a completely different. Good evening, Cynical Skeptic. How are you? It was a completely different vibe than the Portugal-Uruguay game we watched earlier in the evening, where Portugal was down 1-0, and they just kept attacking a staunch Uruguayan defense, and that was fantastic to watch. Portugal never gave up; they kept, and it's just amazing that that Spain couldn't put them away, and they had nobody. There was multiple times when they would finally break down the Russian defense, and they got a guy at the top of the key or top of the box, and he would have the ball on his right foot, and then he would pass. What are you doing? It was like I was having flashbacks to watching the Buffalo Sabres. One too many passes, guys. Put the friggin' puck on net. somebody drive the net, somebody do something. It was just, we were both screaming, like, somebody move. They were just making it easy for Russia to set back 10 guys and go, we'll just stand here in our lanes and wait for the clock to run out. And then eventually, and then we got down and then when I got down to penalty kicks, it was really obvious. I noted to Camille after like the second shot, and it was 2-2 penalties. I went, the Spanish goaltender looks scared, and the Russian goaltender looks psyched. He's like, yeah, you're right. I'm like, I mean, he just, and you could see it was a difference in the body language. I don't want to sit here and do like a bombard thing or anything. It was really obvious that, one guy was going to attack this and do everything imaginable to try and keep the ball out of his net. And the other guy was just like, ah! And, that's always, and from what I understand, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's always been the knock on Spain that they have tremendous talent, but they've never been able to, kind of get up and over, and that they always fold in the big. And so here's Spain, and here's Russia, just playing their hearts out. And frankly, the referee was calling that game way too tight and giving Spain every opportunity. Quite sad. I didn't get a chance to watch Brazil-Mexico. I'm bummed that Mexico is out of the tournament. Because the Mexicans played with a tremendous heart. Loved watching their games in the first round. They were certainly those first two games they played were tremendous. I didn't, the game they played against Germany was just good competition. I'm not a huge soccer fan. I only really watch the World Cup. But I'm a lifelong watcher of sports. I know when a team is working really hard. I know what's happening here. And I can talk sports. I can talk baseball, football, hockey, basketball. I can all the sports with the best of them. I just don't. It's not a priority for me. It was when I was younger. It isn't today. So let's remember, in a former life, I was a prominent blogger as well. So covering the NHL. So, and interestingly enough, covering the politics of the NHL. So kind of like a dry run for. All right. So, but the funniest thing I've heard about the World Cup since then, I want to bring after we get it, done with all the sports blogging and I did not watch today's games. I tend to just download them off of the torrent sites because I'm evil, and then watch the replay. Yeah, it was obvious to me, James, that Spain does have great midfielders and they don't have a great fast-footed striker. Yes, exactly. Their possession game works really well when their opposition isn't skilled or fast. Well, the Russians are neither skilled nor fast, and it still wound up fighting them out. Honestly, the Russian team reminded me so much of the 1994 U.S. World Cup team playing on U.S. soil, that they were a bunch of scrappy guys, mix of old and young, some guys who were well past their prime, not particularly skilled. Not good. I mean, they never handle the ball cleanly the entire game. And I watched their game against Saudi Arabia, and I watched their other game. Watched another Russians game. And they were fine against low end competition, but I fully expected them to get broken down by Spain. I just did. And I mean, all Spain had to do was just attack them because they were just better with the ball. Individually, they were better with the ball. It took two Russians to move the ball. It just. No, I saw the results for Belgium and Japan, and I am going to download that game and watch it probably tomorrow morning. I won't tell Camille, right? Because I did see it on my Twitter feed as it was going through. So I get spoiled all the time. But it's okay. But thank you for expecting to not telling me what happened where Belgium came back and scored in stoppage time to win the game. I heard. I was scrolling through my Twitter feed. I'm like, 1-0 Japan, 2-0 Japan, because I was writing all day, so I wasn't really following what the headlines and what was going on in the news today. And every couple of hours I would scroll through. So it's like 1-0 Japan, 2-0 Japan, 2-1 Japan. Oh my God, Belgium tied it up. Uh-oh. I know where this game's going. But there's two things I want to talk about with respect to Russia. And home field advantage is an absolute real thing in the World Cup. The South Koreans proved that. The Americans proved it. And the Russians proved it. I don't think the Russians go much farther, but that's That's fair enough. And I think that the Russians would be very happy to go out in the quarters. And that's just fascinating. So there's two things. Again, let's get to the important stuff here. Two things I want to talk about geopolitics. Obviously, the World Cup's been a tremendous success for Russia from a PR perspective. I read an article today over at Russia Insider. Got a link down below in the description to the video that I want you to check out, which is an interview with one of the Russian ministers of finance or prominent Russian economist, and explained the breakdown and the revenue situation for the World Cup. Because normally with these big international sporting events, the host country usually loses money because they have to spend a tremendous amount of money on infrastructure that they then no longer use. I mean, we spend a tremendous amount of money on, like, for example, on Lake Placid back in 1980. And, sure, our bobsled and luge teams and others finally had bobsled tracks to practice on. They didn't have to travel to Europe, for example, go and practice. And that was a big deal. And so in that respect, it was useful for us. But for the Russians, they built 11 soccer. They laid 5,000 miles of rail. They are 1,200 miles of rail, 5,000 miles of roads. They upgraded airports, train terminals, communication systems, everything. What they did was it was a big infrastructure project for them. And the interesting part about it is that they only spent $10 billion. Now, yeah, the Russian ruble is down relative. In 2014, that would have been $20 billion. Russian ruble cut in half relative to the dollar in the last 4 years. But and I remember the World Cup in 1988. I watched that one quite explicitly, rooting against the French. But the Russians didn't spend a lot of money on this tournament, and from what this guy was arguing, that they've already made something like $26 billion in revenue off of the thing itself, from the tourism and the kickbacks from the FIFA that the FIFA kicked in, and ticket sales and this, that, and everything else, and just hotel reservations and all of it. They've made their money back in spades, which is quite impressive that they're already there, and they have all the infrastructure that they've laid out in all of the cities. That's there as well. And so this is a tremendous kickstart to the entire Russian for the next century. I did think that the 1998 World Cup was fantastic. We'll see how this one plays out. The simple fact that Germany lost, I don't like. It's funny. I mentioned this when we first started talking about the World Cup, that I have a fundamental bias against the way Germany plays, and it's not necessarily that they're German. I trash Germany a lot politically on the channel, and I don't mean that I dislike Germans. Let's mostly talk about German politics. German people I take everybody individually, not a collective. But I do not like the way the Germans play soccer. It reminds me too much of the Smash Mouth kind of stuff that gets played in what amounts to original six markets in the NHL, and it really bothers the crap out of me because they're very good at manipulating the referees and using their reputation to get away with stuff that other teams can't get away with. The Germans did look old in this. They did, and it was something that I mentioned to Camille, that we keep having they keep having the defending champions go out in the group stage, and this is like the fourth or fifth World Cup in a row that this has happened. And I find it interesting that it says to me that there's a changing of the guard in soccer, that soccer in many ways is becoming much more democratized around the world, and that soccer programs around the world are getting better, right? Here we are, Japan taking Belgium to the last minute today in the round of 16. I get another European, I don't say that Belgium is a European powerhouse, but they're certainly in the conversation. South Korea played the Germans like the Germans normally do, and played them to a standstill. And so I just have a fundamental problem with the way the Germans play. I love watching teams like Spain play, right? I love the technical the possession game. They just need, as James has mentioned, they just need a striker so that they can put these balls away. But their game against Portugal was fantastic. And that was probably for me. I know Portugal-Uruguay was a fantastic game, and I think that Portugal-Spain was also a fantastic. Spain dominated, but the difference between Portugal and Spain is that Spain in many ways is a team, and Portugal is 10 guys and Cristiano Ronaldo. And Cristiano Ronaldo won them the game. Or tied them the game. Kept them in the game and wound up forcing a 3 draw. Found fascinating. So just watching this play out in Russia this year is fantastic, because this should truly kickstart a new generation of Russian soccer players. It would be great. And it's not like the Russians aren't known for producing world-class athletes. I think Alexander Ovechkin was at the game today, and I heard something about Ovi being in the house today. I'm wondering if he was in the house with the Stanley Cup, and I didn't see any. I meant to go and look to see if there was if that was the case. If that would have been fantastic for them. Or not today, but yesterday, to have the Stanley Cup be in the house when the Russians take down mighty Spain in the World Cup. I think that's like, I mean, if you're Russian, how fucking cool is that, right? I mean, seriously, how cool is that? That would be tremendous. That would be us. That would be like us knocking off Brazil in the quarterfinals, and and I don't know, TJ Oshie bringing the Stanley Cup to the game. I think prominent American player at this point. So, it'd just be very cool. So that'd be cool. But the second thing I wanted to talk about, and this is a little minor point. Did they use that cauldron play? Liz is making a reference actually to Russian military strategy, where they do the cauldron, right? Where they allow a weak line and then encircle and destroy. No, that really doesn't work in soccer. You don't want to give them an advantage and then try and circle it. That doesn't work. You can't let them through the defense onto the goaltender, because then there's no way to. It doesn't work. And certainly they never had the ball in the midfield to even try something like that, for example. But the second thing about this World Cup that's fascinating is that after that win, the thing I heard was, I was flipping through my Twitter feed and saw they might as well call this the soccer generation, because there's sex everywhere. That apparently, everybody was, the party atmosphere was so high that, expect a whole bunch of, expect a whole bunch of babies 9 to 10 months from now, after this is all over, because the Russians are as happy as clams, and happy days tend to result in babies, which is for the demographically challenged Russians a good thing. So the other thing to think about here is that this is a Russian team built by a generation, the thin generation, right? Post Soviet Union breakdown, Yeltsin years, right? There's nothing there. There's no infrastructure for really professional soccer players. Not there. So things can only look up from here for Russian soccer. I just don't see that being. I don't see it being a problem going forward. Whether they'll be in the 2022 World Cup or not is a story, but who cares? I also find it really funny that this is the Russian World Cup in the Americas. It's not just irony at this point. It's kind of great stuff. So that's my take on the World Cup, and to this point, we'll talk about this. Now that Mexico's out, I don't really have anybody that I'm all the way. I just don't expect the Russians to play up. I think actually that would be bad for soccer if the Russians. To be honest with you, they're not a good team. I mean, they're not good. They play with a lot of heart. I got a lot of respect for them. I love that. I've watched this before. I was a Sabres fan for years while Dominic Hasek literally carried an AHL team nearly to within, one goal of the Stanley Cup for fuck. So I get it, right? I know how this plays out. But I'm good at rooting for the dog. I'm good at rooting for those teams that are unskilled but play with this unbelievable heart. And the Sabres teams, late 90s, early aughts, were just fantastic. Mike Pekka led Pekka Hasek. Those were They were just that was great hockey, right? That was make a man proud. Good evening, Rabbi Glickman. How are you? All right. Next thing I want to talk about. Let's talk about Merkel, because no one's talking about this. I've been going back and forth with a German national privately. He's been emailing me. He and I have been emailing back and forth, and so he's been trying to help educate me on the internal workings of German politics, right? And to help me improve not only my writing on it, but my understanding of what's going on and the greater nuance of it, because I don't speak German. I can't read Der Spiegel and Der Welt in its native tongue. So look at things as I do from my enclave here in Florida and see what I see and make the best guesses as to what I think is happening. And it's interesting that I get this kind of feedback from people pretty regularly, privately, trying to assist my understanding of really good. So let's talk about Merkel. Let's talk about Horst Seehofer. Let's talk about his resignation, because there's something that everybody's missing. I got an article in editorial over at Strategic Culture. Probably won't be out till Wednesday. I'm hoping it's not dated by the time it comes out, because it's really important that you understand what's going on here. According to the person I've been discussing with, I don't want to put his name out, simply because privately about this stuff, so I don't know whether he wants to. But we set the Wayback Machine for what's going on with Seehofer and his call for resignation, and the way he's calling for the resignation is important, because what happened yesterday looks like a classic capitulation. Merkel wins a fight against another political opponent, and she gets to live another day. She wins to live another day. But she definitely caved this afternoon after kind of not caving earlier on Friday of last week, and then over the weekend when she met with Seehofer to try and work some. Now, those of you who don't understand what's going on, Angela Merkel is the head of the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, or Seehofer is the leader of the CSU, the Christian Social Union. They are the union party that makes up the majority in German politics, and have been the de facto ruling, the majority member of the coalition government, that whatever coalition government Merkel's put together since she's been in power for these past 13 years. Now, and she's put these coalition governments together with the openly leftist Social Democrats to create an effectively cartel-style government that doesn't really stand for much at all, other than the European Union, which is where Merkel's true loyalties lie. Right? We all know this, but just to make sure that everybody's up to speed. So, Seehofer was finally given or the CSU was finally given a prominent cabinet post within the union after this election, because they have a tremendous amount of power. Because normally they only come in about 8 or 9% of the vote, because they're mostly a Bavarian party, and Merkel's CDU commands 30 to 35%. So she gets to, she can put together basically whatever government she wants, except for this time where together they only polled about 32%. Then they needed the Social Democrats to stave off a second vote, which would benefit Germany, which nobody in German politics wants in power. The people may want them in power, but the German political elite establishment does not want them in power. Certainly, the EU doesn't want them in power. So the goal here was to cobble together a government that would allow Merkel to remain the chancellor in the chancellorship. Seehofer was able to extract Interior Minister from Merkel as part of the coalition party, and part of the coalition agreement. And so They put him in charge of immigration. There you go. That's where we are. So now, here's the fun part. Unfortunately, I don't have my phone, so I can block Mr. Doberman. By the way, I'm Italian. So, all right. So, Seehofer cannot come to her. So after 2 weeks, after his 2-week ultimatum, Seehofer creates a showdown with Merkel over immigration policy in Germany. To his credit, he doesn't back down. And for the first time, really, in his career, he doesn't just bow to Merkel. Right? Till something actually comes through on Periscope that doesn't suck, just going to kill the restream. If anybody really wants to comment, come on over to YouTube. Because the German alt-right is now. I'm not interested. All right. You guys can go fuck. All right. So, according to my German correspondent, if you set the Wayback Machine to 2015 during the Greek debt talks, don't remember what happened then, because it's complicated. If you don't remember what happened then, I'll explain. During the Greek debt talks, Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble had put together a plan with Varoufakis, the Greek finance minister, to allow Greece to leave the euro. Schäuble was under no compunction whatsoever to give Greece any concessions. He actually couldn't, in many ways, give them the concessions that they were looking for. Legally, it's not really possible, from what I understand. I'm not 100% sure about this, but let's go with this for the sake of argument. So the plan was, or the agreement was, for Schäuble to allow Varoufakis and Greece to leave the euro. Tsipras, the PM, was not prepared for this because he's a feckless Greek left. And Merkel in no way could allow Greece to leave the eurozone because Greece is only in the eurozone because of their strategic importance to NATO. That and the European Union is the Borg, and they want to subsume all of Europe and effectively destroy Russia. That's the goal of the Davos crowd, Bilderberg group, neocons, crypto Jews, all of it. Put all those guys together, that's what they want, right? They want feudal oligarchy for them, with them in charge, and subjugation of everybody else. In short, the bad guys, for lack of a better term. The row between Merkel and Schäuble was so bad that in an interview that he gave in Der Spiegel in July of 2015, he made it abundantly clear that he would self-terminate his position as finance minister by going directly to the federal president. In this case today is Frank-Walter Steinmeier. And bypass the chancellor. The narrative up to this point, or the order of events, the flow chart for what happens in Germany if certain things didn't have, if Merkel and Seehofer don't come to an agreement, then she's going to have, he stands his ground and starts turning migrants away at the border, then she's going to have to fire him because she can't lose face, and then that would bring down, then the CSU would leave the coalition, and then the coalition would collapse. That's one version of it. Other version of it is that Seehofer, and he said this in his speech today, in his statement today, I do not want the chancellor to take my job. I want to resign, and that's his way of saying, and he wants Steinmeier to accept his resignation, which would then invalidate the coalition agreement and force a vote of no confidence against Merkel. And if that's the case, If that's the case, then Merkel's days are numbered, that they're going back to the polls. Cynical skeptic brings in, Varoufakis could have made Greece leave the EU. He admitted himself, however, his Europeanism trumped his patriotism. I agree. There was still a deal that could have been made. He could have gone that route. But he chose not to let, he still chose poorly. And effectively, Schäuble was able to, and this is where I kind of disagree with my German correspondent or pen pal, right? Is I don't think that Schäuble's motivations were quite so honorable, because in my mind, Schäuble is part of the architect of the EU in creating this wealth transfer system that is the EU to Germany's benefit at everybody else's expense. That's my take on the subject. Feel free to disagree with me. I'm fine with that, but that's the way I look at it. And so I don't ever think that. I always thought that Schäuble was just playing a game of chicken with Varoufakis, and that the Greeks would have to accept term maturation extension, can kicking, as opposed to an actual debt write-down. User 13 pipes up, the Greeks are far too left to do what needs to be done. Or as my very good Greek friend tells me all the time, never underestimate the fecklessness of the Greek left. It's just that simple. So the situation with Seehofer is very interesting, because he's really trying to destroy Merkel. That's the takeaway. And that could be catastrophically interesting. Catastrophic for the euro, obviously. Catastrophic for European bond markets. It's going to completely screw with the ECB's plans to, I don't know how the ECB gets. The ECB is absolutely between a rock and a hard place about ending QE and raising interest rates. They can't do either of those things. And yet, somehow, and apparently the Italians really don't have the option of debt restructuring or debt forgiveness. They can only get debt restructure, they can't debt forgive without leaving the euro. And so, again, we're in that same kind of thing. So what's going on with Salvini and the rest of them? I think what Salvini's doing, Italy, what Salvini's doing is he's seeing the opportunity to fill the power vacuum left by Merkel and Macron and change the course of the European Union completely. And in effect, keeping the political union, but giving people a way out of giving the countries a way out of the not economic union, but the monetary union, which was always doomed to failure anyway, because there's no political will to create a centralized debt issuer across all of the states in Europe. And if there is, it would only be amongst the debtor states, which is fine, but then all of the creditor nations like Germany and the rest of Northern Europe, they'd all want to leave, which ultimately means that one of two things is going to happen. And I've always kind of agreed with Jim Rickards on this. Years ago, Rickards was talking about these things and saying, well, the European Union is going to fail for these reasons. They're going to eventually just become a Northern European currency bloc, and the rest of it's going to go away. Well, the opposite may happen now because of this massive wave of populism where all the rules are changed. When you listen to Jim Rickards speak, you got to remember that he's part spook, because he's so well connected, and he does work with the CIA, and he does wargaming with the DoD and everything else. So hybrid wargaming with the DoD. So he knows what's going on. And this is the interesting part about this, is that, Rickards is always going to give you the argument about the institutions, the post-World War II institutional set is going to retain their power. That's his default position, whether he's saying this because he knows something, or he's trying to shift the narrative, or whether that's just his personal bias. I opt for the latter, to be honest with you. That's his own personal bias. But when you're that close to everything, it just makes sense that it's your own personal bias. And that at the end of the day, he keeps arguing that the IMF SDR is going to take over and yada yada, and all these other things. And I don't buy any of that. I honestly buy that we're looking at a much different, much more a much more unpredictable outcome if than we were looking at, say, in 2015 or 2016. Salvini and the Italians changed the game, and the more I think this through, the more I'm convinced that that's what's happening. And I think Trump is on board with this as well. And that's why he's putting as much pressure on Germany and Merkel and trying to isolate them politically as possible. And it's why, here's the big one, why the NATO summit could be even more important than the Trump-Putin summit. The Trump-Putin summit is only could actually be the coda on what Trump does at the NATO summit. Salvini's called for a league of leagues of like-minded parties across Europe to band together to basically to throw from power the standing unelected technocracy of the EU, an oligarchy of the EU, is astounding. I haven't even had a chance to process all of this. All of this has been happening so quickly. And so I'm kind of actually processing it right now live on YouTube. This is what my brain does when you give it just enough caffeine. I see that I'm finally that cynical skeptic and I finally agree on something. I think that's great. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. So guys, this all becomes very, very interesting now. And now that's your revolution, popular revolution in Europe. Now let's shift to the other side of the pond. Well, and then to the other side of the Gulf of Mexico. Because yesterday's results in Mexico, the right has already, the neocon right has already gotten their talking points together. They are absolutely there to try and undermine Obrador, the significance of Obrador's victory. Okay, now let's start with the basic stuff. I know we're all here on the scope. We're all vaguely right of center, and that a guy like an open socialist like Obrador is scary. And I'll get to your question in a minute, User 13. I just want to bring this up about Obrador. I want you guys to dispense with the party label ideology at this point. Stop thinking about him as being left or right of center. No one at this point. Mexico is such a feudal nightmare. I hate to say it, but if I was Mexican, I'd probably be a leftist. That's how bad it is. Okay? It's the only populist alternative, in a sense. Okay? Because, and so Obrador's got the challenge. His heart's in the right place as a real reformer. And he already came out and had a phone call with Trump and said, yep, we want to work on controlling immigration across the border of Mexico. Fantastic. The first thing that popped into my head, because I'm doing some stuff for I've been head deep and neck deep in writing the newsletter this month, and so a lot of the themes of this month's newsletter are on top of my head. So as I was trying to process all of Mexico, and I was sitting down chatting with Camille this morning while we're watching the soccer game, we're talking about this, and we both, kind of flashed on it immediately and said, look, the drug war is the mechanism. Right. The drug war, though, is the main destabilizing aspect of Mexico, on top of the 7 families that have been running the country for 7 family oligarchies that have been running the country for the last 100 years. It's a failed petrostate and narco state, but it's failed for so many reasons. And when you really stop to do the analysis on it, don't kid yourself. Trump is trying to stop this, but he knows damn well that why the Clintons won't give up and why the establishment won't give up against him is because they know goddamn well that it's the Bushes and the Clintons and and the CIA and everybody else that are neck deep in the corruption in Mexico, neck deep in the drug trade across the border from Mexico. And so Obrador's got a tremendous challenge ahead of him, but he has an ally in Donald Trump. And so it's obvious that when you start to piece everything together that Trump has been doing outside of foreign policy, what he's actually trying to do relative to immigration, and he's being stymied at every turn by every entrenched and compromised government official in Washington, is to end this illegal immigration scheme, which was a fucking policy designed and implemented by the Obama administration going back to 2011 and the destabilization of Honduras and Obama going to Panama and Costa Rica and all these countries in order to set up the infrastructure to bring hundreds of thousands of people into the United States to turn Florida, Texas, Arizona, and the rest of them blue permanently, so the Democrats would never have to face a real election ever again, and they would have exported the oligarchic control of Mexico into the United States, and they would never have to worry about a challenge of their power ever again. Why they were so scared of Ron Paul. That's why they're terrified of Donald Trump. Why they're terrified of us. So the Mexicans this weekend, tremendous result. To just say, fuck it. The Americans rolled the dice on Trump, for fuck's sake. Roll the dice on this guy. But James, it's deeper than just illegals being equal to outsourcing of blue collar work. It's deeper than that. This is about transnational, supranational, corporate oligarchic control of the entire freaking world. TPP, TTIP, the Paris Accords, NAFTA, GATT, all of it. This is what this shit's all about. And all of these people are absolutely, it's why, and as a random researcher, if he was here, would remind me, and I'll check on, or are we just looking at, uh-oh. There they are. Hold on for just a second. Gotta look. Yep, they're all here. All the alt-rights here. Whatever. It's about destroying peoples and nations. It's about it. Random researcher will remind us that it's the Chinese that are importing shit tons of fentanyl in through Mexico, and that's part of the drug trade. But but Trump has an opportunity starting right after the midterms to really go after marijuana legalization, which makes it more difficult for the cartels to import cocaine into the country. It'll destroy so much of their power base. Yes, as Liz Sandy just pointed out, she's loving living in the age of fuck it. I'm right. Called the age of Gen X. Gen X is just getting started, and these people are going to hang from nooses. It's going to be interesting to watch it play out. I mean, it really is. So I think that there's a natural alliance here, and I think that we're going to watch Trump take the gloves off on this post midterms, because once he's got a real legislative majority in the Senate, which he doesn't have now, talked about many times, really at 47 to 53, even though there's 52 nominal Republicans in the Senate, right? But John McCain's not allowed to retire, even though he's on his freaking deathbed and can barely get out of bed in the morning. But John McCain is still a senator, right? That's how corrupt the system is. John McCain is still a senator, right? And he's not going to for all we know, John McCain's already dead, and they refuse to let anybody, and they refuse to admit it. Seen him recently? Right. I mean, we have five members of the Senate who can be switched relative to party affiliation. on a moment's notice with the cheapest of blackmail. Never forget, that's what they're scared of. They're scared of. I mean, as much as this crazy millennial from Long Island, not as crazy as she is, she's an outsider. She just replaced a machine Democrat that was in line for Speaker of the House after Pelosi was finally put out the pasture for having freaking Alzheimer's or, strokes. That woman should also be out of office. The only reason these people are there is because they're scared to death of them leaving a power vacuum that could be filled by, the wrong people. Where we are. I mean, we've got Stepford senators at this point. What are we talking about? Crazy. But it's what it is. Keep it going. By the end, but once the midterms are over and Trump has a clear, and I think there's going to be a red tide in this country that will literally see liberals jumping off of roofs on the second Wednesday in November. There will be an uptick in suicides. Okay? There will be an outpouring of vitriol and angst that if you think you're drunk on liberal tears now, you'll be able to water your gardens with them. It'll be great. I hate to say it, but that's just the way it is. But at the same time, the center of this country is going to completely abandon them. Already happening. In droves. They're losing the Hispanics, for Christ's sake. They're losing the black men. All right, and to bring the conversation all the way around, and more babies born. I can't wait either. And when that happens, it will free Trump up to do all that he has to do. And if it means firing Jeff Sessions in order to get marijuana legalization through, he will. He's truly angry with Jeff Sessions for how he's handled Russiagate and the FBI and the DOJ and everything else. And he may do that. But he can't fire Sessions now. He can't get rid of his AG. We'll never get another one. Rosenstein would be in charge. So that's the situation. We all know it and we all understand it. So wait for the midterms. So what Trump is focusing on now is the stuff that he can control. Destroying Merkel, settling Syria, opening up relations with Putin, and pressuring them in every level. He's pressuring every angle he can on foreign policy right now. He's at the same time, he's also making the terrible mistake of thinking that he can regime change Iran and keep the American empire through energy dominance. It's a mess. He's a mix of good and bad. He's Donald Trump. His faults are as glaring as his strengths, but he is who he is. The Iwan brothers tells you everything you need to know about the level of corruption in Congress. Exactly, W. Very, very good point. Sessions is feckless to the point of being a mole in the administration. User 13. Also correct. If reports are true that Rod Rosenstein is like a deer caught in the headlights and he's really just trying to save his own skin, this thing's going to end badly for everyone. They're all going to go to jail. Or if not go to jail, then what's going to happen? Because remember, here's the other thing. Crowley's out. I don't know, but somebody could probably look this up real quick because I don't have time for it because I'm doing the scope. But what committees did he sit on? What committee seniority did they just lose when this guy is no longer in office? I'll leave that one hanging. Cynical skeptic, Tom, what's your take on Poland's offer to host American military bases? They're willing to pay for it. Will Trump do it? Maybe. Poland. I think Poland is more worried about Germany than they are Russia, which is why they're so opposed to Nord Stream. I mean, I'm not asking you to underestimate Polish Russophobia and hatred of Russians. I'm not asking you to. I'm just saying that politically, I think the Law and Justice Party is more worried about their energy security being compromised, having to ask Germany to supply them gas via Nord Stream 2 and then redistribute it through the other pipelines. And the names of them are escaping me right now, and I apologize. So it makes sense to me that Poland would still want the Americans to have presence there, because they may be signaling to everybody that the United States actually wants to pull out of NATO in a substantive way, continue to draw down out of Germany, and they want some form of security, potentially against the new Grand Army of the EU. Not that I see the Americans going to war against Germany and France on behalf of Poland. So the Poles can ask for a lot, but I'm not sure that it actually matters. Science and Transportation, Indian Affairs. Crowley sat on the Committee of Science and Transportation and Indian Affairs. John McCain also serves on several subcommittees. Oh, I know John McCain serves on Armed Forces, Foreign Affairs, right? John McCain is the big one, right? John McCain's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. That sanctions bill is a John McCain bill. So, okay. Not necessarily, so Crowley wasn't really, transportation, maybe. Unless there's Indian Affairs, maybe. There may be a drug war angle there where, there's legislation that's pushed through those committees in order to get waivers pushed, transportation waivers and whatnot. Possible. Thank you, user 13. I appreciate it. All right, guys. We're at the 52-minute mark. I'll take a couple more questions while I ramble on a little bit, but I really think that situation in Mexico is, in the short term, is going to be bad. Going to be, expect more deep state destabilization of Mexico, which Trump will not be able to control. Right? And we're going to see the markets through Goldman and the rest of them punish the peso, punish Mexican debt, punish him for rolling back all of the quote-unquote privatization schemes that went on during Nieto's presidency. I was chatting with a friend of mine this afternoon, partner this afternoon, and I said, while he was going on and on and on about the situation in Mexico and how unstable it is, I said, what you're telling me, what it sounds like, and he actually made this point. He said, at this point, I wouldn't even be angry. This is my friend who's as nearly as freaking hardcore free market guy as I am. That at this point, I wouldn't even fault Obrador for nationalizing Pemex, the state oil company, the renationalizing all of the oil industry, the whole thing, because it's that bad. And I said, and at that point, I just said, look, well then the best analogy for his current situation is Putin when he took over in 2001. Meaning that the next, and if that's the case, then the next 3 or 4 years are going to be very difficult for him. But if Donald Trump and he can form an alliance, it'll go a lot smoother than it did for. Won't have the United States as his enemy as much. Especially if Trump can really clean up the State Department and the CIA and the DOJ and the DEA and the rest of them. Not sure that he can do it, but this is where we are, and these are the points that we need to be making in the press, in our circles and in the press where we can. That these are the issues that need to be taken up, and not just in general immigration. We actually need to start the process of not demonizing the Mexicans, because they're not really the problem. It's the feudal overlords in Mexico. It's the cartels. It's the deep-seated corruption between the Mexican government and quasi-government and the United States government. That's the problem. Everybody is a victim. everybody. So that's pretty much what I've got for this evening. I think that that's pretty much show. Got a great World Cup. We got a revolution, populist revolution in Mexico, which could begin the process of truly reforming that country. Would be great. And we have an honest to God political revolution in Germany, with the Italians leading the charge for a popular revolt within the EU, where Salvini and Mark Rutte, possibly, who's met with Trump today, and Sebastian Kurz in Austria, and Viktor Orban in Hungary, and the rest of them, all form an alliance against Merkel and Macron. I did see that, James. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but I did. I saw it, but I hadn't had a chance to watch the link you sent me. So I will do that later. So, guys, this has been a fun show. I've really appreciated it. You can check out my work over at goldgoatsandguns.com. You can subscribe. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel if you aren't already. Please tell your friends, and make sure you give it a like and a reshare wherever you can. I'll be on probably Wednesday morning. We'll talk about something, because I think by Wednesday morning we'll have a little bit more clarity on what's happening with Merkel, and obviously there's stuff going on in the markets, and gold looks weak here, and the dollar is beginning to rise. So I think there's still a lot to talk about. Always, I'll try and do about half an hour, 35 minutes in the afternoon, late morning, early afternoon, Wednesday. So you guys take care. You have a great afternoon. If not, Friday night, 9 o'clock. You guys take care. Great evening. Stick on ice. Be good.